let's get our, thanks, Pete. All right, so I'm happy to welcome everybody today to the May 2025 CSPAR Spotlight. CSPAR is the Center for Suicide Prevention and Recovery, and it is our center at the University of Washington Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, for where our kind of core suicide prevention and suicide care researchers are working through. Today we're going to present one of our own projects that is a continuation of our work on caring contacts. Many of you are aware of our military research on caring contacts and our tribal research on caring contacts, which we have finished but is still under tribal review, and we will share as soon as it's available. And today we're going to talk about our human-centered design and pilot testing of our informatics-supported authorship of caring contacts, or ISACC project, where we have developed a web app to send caring contacts and pilot it into different settings. We've also been working on several innovations around this kind of research, including the use of EMA as a outcome and mechanism form of measurement, and conducting research entirely online. And I'm really delighted today to introduce our team who'll be presenting today. This includes Anna Evanson and Barbara Wright, who are our research scientists, who led this project and our follow-up clinical trial, as well as Keeney Law at Seattle Pacific University and Andrew Rogers at SUNY Buffalo, who have been collaborating on our methodology and management of high-risk participants. And I want to also say thank you to the Face the Fight Charitable Fund, who funded this research but has not in any way dictated how we are doing anything, and none of us have conflicts of interest to report. And with that, I will hand it off and let's get started.
You'll hand it off to yourself, Kate, actually.
Okay. All right. So some of you may actually not be familiar with caring contacts, and if not, let's make sure that you know a little bit about it. So caring contacts is a brief intervention that was developed in the 60s to send brief supportive messages, originally by postal mail. There have been research since then on both email and text messaging. The idea is the messages are sent at regular intervals over a fairly long period of time, so anywhere from a year. There have been one study of 6 months, a couple studies of 2 years, and the idea is to keep sending these brief supportive messages over time and maintain that connection. And what we've seen is this is one of the few interventions that reduces the risk of suicide attempts, and some studies have shown reductions in the death by suicide or suicidal ideation. We've done research, as I mentioned, in military and Native and rural communities with caring contacts, and what we've seen consistently is that while it has a really positive effect, many people who think, oh, great, let's do this intervention, approach it and end up discovering that it really isn't feasible for them, because the complexity of who do I send a message to, when do I send a message to them, how do I respond to a message, all of these things have been more labor intensive and more complex than they know what to do with. And that was the main problem we were seeking to solve when we started this project. Next slide. So we developed ISACC, our informatics supported authorship of caring contacts. This was started with a small grant from the Garvey Institute for Brain Sciences, where we were figuring out what were the needs that people had to be able to implement a program like this. Based on that, we developed a low fidelity prototype of ISACC, and with the goal that we're going to reduce things that are labor intensive, make things kind of reduce the cognitive burden, figure out how to make it easy and feasible for people to respond to caring contacts. So we use the DDBT human-centered design model. So this is the discover, design, build, test model. So the idea of discovery, which we did in our previous research with the Garvey Institute, helped us figure out what are the needs of programs that are implementing caring contacts, tried to implement caring contacts and gave up, or considered implementing caring contacts and figured out that they couldn't figure out how to do it. Based on that, like I said, we developed a low fidelity prototype, and with this funding, did a iterative series of design and build projects to use agile prototyping to build a viable product. And based on that viable product, we moved to the test phase, conducting a pilot study of caring contacts using the ISACC web app to send them, and also bringing in some other innovations that we wanted to pilot test ahead of a larger clinical trial. So what we developed and from the ISACC product was a product where you can see, if you start on the right-hand side, you can see what the messages look like to the participant. So these are sort of mocked up messages that are typical of what messages would look like to a participant on their cell phone. You can see our messages on the left, their replies on the right. And one of the lovely things about caring contacts is the majority of contacts, you're not catching somebody at a really difficult time in their life. And so you have many more positive interactions than most people are used to when working with suicidal folks, who we often see because they've reached out to us in crisis. What you can see on the left are two mock-ups, one for the computer, one for the phone, of what it looks like on our side. So you can see that this ISACC system has core information that we need about the participant on the right. On the phone, it would be at the top. And then you can see, again, back and forth messaging and color-coded by things that are the standard message versus things that we sent back as a manual message. And the entire thing can live in a way that is very, very easy if you get a new reply from a participant to figure out what's going on, what's been communicated before, and reduce the cognitive burden of coming up with a response. Next slide.
So
All right. So before we tested out ISACC in a clinical trial, we really first wanted to test out some research methods to really see if we can capture the changes that caring contacts has in our suicide outcomes, as well as identify some proposed mechanisms that we would want to test in our clinical trial. So our pilot study had three major aims. The first being, how does EMA match up with less time-intensive less intensive time sampling approaches, like just doing a pre and post, or even just a pre, mid, and post sampling approach that we usually use in clinical trials. We also wanted to know, can we fully automate this process and limit human contact while still maintaining high levels of participant engagement with the EMA? And so specifically, we wanted to know, can we maintain consistency and engagement across each block of EMA assessments we gave people? And also, is this approach feasible and acceptable to our participants? And then finally, given some of the research in using dynamic systems modeling, suggesting that variability is really important for us to take a look at, and that suicidal ideation and urges may be more dynamic than linear in their trajectory, we wanted to see if we can detect variability in our suicide outcomes and our proposed mechanisms, which we looked at mainly kind of connectivity being the main mechanism through which caring contact works. And we had several different measures that tap into that. And then we wanted to just kind of visually see in our pilot data if the delivery of a caring contact actually changes the corresponding changes in the variability of some of these variables that we were looking at. And so our pilot had 30 participants who were recruited from two different sites, and 63 identified as women and 36.7% identified as men. We had a little bit less than 50% white race in our sample, and about 28.6% of our sample had suicidal ideation in the past 2 weeks, and 23.2% had a history of suicide attempts. And so these participants went through our procedures. First, they kind of gave their consent and completed our baseline survey. They then did a 2-week baseline EMA to establish baseline, but also kind of to get them used to the idea of getting the EMAs, troubleshoot, and all of that fun stuff. And then all of our participants then received both a monthly set of EMAs plus a care and contact delivery within that month for 3 months. And then they did a follow-up survey, and then they were possibly selected for a qualitative interview to kind of capture some of the acceptability, feasibility, and usability issues with the study design. So one of the main things that we, next slide, Anna. One of the main things that we really tried to do here in that automation process was have them sign up from the baseline survey, have them sign up for Inclivio, our EMA delivery service, on their own. And so that was mostly done on their own. And the rest of them, the rest of the study procedures were fairly automatic as well. And so we had limited engagement from the baseline survey all the way through to payment. They were mostly on their own unless we noticed any issues that were flagged or any risk that we needed to address. And so there were some issues with the way we had automated it, but Anna will talk more about that when we talk about how we adapted the procedures for the clinical trial. The other innovation that we were testing out is this idea of EMA blocks. So I mentioned earlier that we had 2 weeks of EMA to establish baseline measurements of the suicide outcomes and proposed mechanisms for our sample. Our EMAs were then delivered in what we call blocks. And so each EMA block contained 3 assessments a day for 7 days. So it's the first week of every month. And there was 1 block every single month. So for this pilot trial, we had 3 months of EMA blocks. And then some of the blocks contained a care and contact delivery while others didn't. So sometimes within that block, they received a care and contact delivery, sometimes they didn't. And just here you can see visually this was actually the chart for the final trial that we made. This is 60 weeks of our final trial, but for the pilot, we only did 12 weeks. The red text, the red numbers are the weeks in which participants got a EMA block. And then the purple squares are weeks when they received a care and contact delivery. So you'll see here some care and contact deliveries corresponded with a block, some didn't. We just didn't want participants to expect that there would always be a care and contact delivery during the EMA, so we can actually look at the effects of the care and contact delivery. All right, so next slide. Here is our pre and post assessment battery. I won't kind of read everything out here, but we did have the suicide cognition scale, the SIQ Junior, and the interpersonal needs questionnaire, the Beck hopelessness scale, and the PHQ-9, which all had measures of suicide outcomes in there. We also had some mechanisms like a loneliness scale, social support, defeat, entrapment. We really wanted to look at mattering. And so we had the general mattering and the anti-mattering scale. And then we had our demographics, which included the participants' military experience. And then for our EMA, our 3 core measures were on visual analog scales. These were 0 to 100 or 0 to 10 sliders for how much you want to die right now, how much you want to live right now, and how strong are your urges for killing yourself right now. We kept single items that had the slider mostly for easy delivery to our participants because these EMAs were happening so frequently. We wanted to make sure that it was easy and quick for participants to respond so that there wasn't too much burden on them. And then we selected some items to measure these the mechanisms that we thought were through which care and contacts was acting on some of these outcomes. And so the first one, of course, being perceived burdensomeness, using a single item from the INQ. I felt that I was a burden to other people or that they would be better off without me. And then we had one measure from the entrapment scale, so I feel trapped. And then we also had the general mattering scale, and because it was so short, We included all 5 items, but we didn't include the general mattering scale at every single EMA delivery. That only came once a day, mostly because we were anticipating that the mattering might be a little bit more stable than burdensomeness and entrapment. And then similarly, we had the responsibility scale, which measured personal and social responsibility. And again, these two, the responsibility scale, particularly the subscales, were only delivered at once a day. So every day or at every assessment, you got definitely you got 5 questions, right? The 3 suicide outcomes one, burdensomeness, entrapment, and then at one delivery that day, you'll get general mattering. At the second delivery, you might get personal responsibility, and then the third delivery, you would get social responsibility. And we had some planned missingness ways to address kind of some of the missingness from these measures. So, yeah. And then I will now pass it off to Andrew, who will talk a bit about our results.
Awesome. Thanks, Kini. So for this first piece here, we wanted to understand how does our EMA sampling method to assess some of these mechanisms match up with less intensive time sampling approaches that have often been used in caring context studies, and as Kini mentioned, sort of that like pre-post design. So it's figure 1 on the left, where we see sort of the blue, green, and yellow boxes. This is sort of where you see the pre-post. So we see desire to die on panel A, suicide urge panel B, and desire to live in panel C. And we do see there are changes. You see that line in the middle of the box is the mean level, and then you see the spread of the data, but we're seeing a decrease from baseline to follow-up in desire to die. There is a decrease in suicide urge. It's really hard to see here. And we see that increase in desire to live between baseline and follow-up. The challenges with this method is that you really miss some of those momentary associations of like, how did we get here? How did caring context actually impact these results? And so if you look here on the figure on the right, we're seeing 2 separate things. We're seeing one, the blue line on the bottom is showing the mean level of desire to die, suicide urge, and desire to live, and how that changes over time, which does match up with the figure on the left. But then what you're also seeing in the orange bar on top is actually variability in these in these constructs. So we are seeing that variability in desire to die is changing over time. We're seeing variability in how people report suicide urges changing, as well as desire to live. And so this really gives us a different way, and potentially more nuanced way, in understanding more so like how are these variables of interest and outcomes actually operating. This of course doesn't get to mechanisms per se, but this is sort of a different way of looking at that. And so then we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about feasibility of this, and then we'll talk about what mechanisms look like. As you see here, we have a table that looks at feasibility metrics of the number of people that completed at least 1 EMA per day, as well as overall compliance and dropouts. So in general, and there's some qualitative data that's presented here, but participants found the sign-up process to be relatively quick and easy. They appreciated receiving the survey links via text, but some did find that the invitations through both text and email were excessive. I mean, I think it's really important that we want to get as much data as we can so we can really understand these mechanisms, and really optimizing how we get that data from participants, I think, is still a question. Compliance rates you see for EMA remained above 50% each month, with about 2/3 of participants completing at least 1 EMA per day in month 1 and decreasing to 50% by month 3, which is pretty typical of longitudinal EMA studies. Most participants also reported that surveys were easy to navigate and preferred using mobile phones for convenience, and they favored shorter, less frequent surveys, citing their practicality and lighter emotional burden. The shorter surveys were, I think, more suitable to a lot of the participants' daily routine. And then some actually did report sort of the in-depth nature of the longer surveys, but I think on average, it was sort of the shorter ones were more favored. There were several barriers that participants reported that impacted their ability to fully engage with the study and can explain potentially some of the dip in compliance rates. So we did want to have an expiration on the surveys, meaning that we weren't just going to have participants complete all surveys at one time point. We did want them to be as close to when we asked them to complete them as possible. And so participants would receive a survey at a less than optimal time and couldn't complete it in the window. Also, some participants reported emotional barriers such as distress during a depressive episode or negatively phrased survey content that hindered engagement. Participants actually did offer some suggestions of ways to improve implementation of future EMAs and EMA blocks, including eliminating the expiration deadlines, which we talked about where some of the limitations are, reducing survey frequency, incorporating some positive reinforcement, and offering more flexible and inclusive response options. So if we go to the next slide, if we talk about then what are the things that we can look at with EMA that we can't look at with pre-post designs are how do these mechanisms relate to outcomes? This is a really, really messy graph, but let me just sort of guide you through some of the things that we can look at. So your black lines here, all three of them are your suicide outcomes, desire to die, desire to live, and suicide urge. And then I just plotted with this two mechanisms that we were looking at, entrapment and perceived burdensomeness. So I'm not going to focus on the red line for now, but I'm just going to look at, you can see sort of how these mechanisms relate to our outcomes of interest over time. This is not a statistical comparison, right? But this is really just sort of a visual comparison is, okay, so we are seeing, let's say, maybe a slight decrease in entrapment and perceived burdensomeness over time. And maybe that we're also seeing a decrease in desire to die, right? So it's possible that these things hang together. And when you actually do look at these, what we call repeated measures within subjects correlations, we do see that there are significant associations between perceived burdensomeness and entrapment over time within a person, meaning that when someone's perceived burdensomeness is changing within themselves over time, then we're also seeing corresponding changes in our suicide outcomes, right? Which is something that you really can only get with repeated data within a person, which is what EMA gives us. The other unique thing that we can look at here is where this red line is drawn is where a caring contact message was delivered while participants were also receiving EMA assessments. So we can see or start to see any impact or not of a caring contact intervention or a caring contact message on some of these suicide mechanisms. Of course, what we miss here is all of the caring contexts that were delivered before and some of the things I think that we worked out for the larger clinical trial that we will present in a moment, right? But this really can allow us to see the impact over time of these direct messages being sent. We can go to the next slide, and I think we're going to be talking about then what this has turned into.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the other aspect of what we were looking at in the pilot trial, which was how well we did with the platform that we designed and how that impacted participants' reception of the caring contacts intervention. And so what we looked at was through qualitative interviews with the recipients. We were asking their opinions on the intervention, which they did get through the web app. And then with the authors, we interviewed them via focus groups, one with each site. And we were asking them their specific experience with the web app. Because just as a reminder, the idea is that of ISACC is that it's a very easy interface for the authors to use, but for a participant, a recipient, a client, they are just getting text messages to their phones. So to them, it shouldn't feel any different from just receiving a text, but with the actual web app, we're hoping that the authors found it useful and helpful in their work. And so just to talk first about the recipients, I'll just remind you again, this was the general results. We actually only were able to interview 14 of them. So these demographics are for all 30, but it mostly aligned with the general gender and race demographics. And we had even number from each site, or about even. And so for the recipient feedback on the caring contacts, I've outlined it here. We had lots more data than this, and we also had some quantitative data, but this is really the qualitative results. As far as acceptability, most really liked the messages, specifically the content and just being able to communicate with their provider via text. Those that didn't, it was really because they just weren't interested in texting their provider, or they didn't feel like their provider had really sort of given a good impression of the intervention when they were signing up, and so they just weren't as interested. As far as barriers or user burdens, no one reported any problems with receiving or responding to the messages after we asked them expressly. But some did say that they would feel guilt at some points of if they weren't able to respond all the time or right away. As far as usability, participants said that texting was easy, and when asked or just unprompted, would mention that it was preferred to using email to communicate with their provider or caseworker, and it was especially preferred to using an EHR such as MyChart, just given all of the steps needed to log in. They preferred texting far more. And for those that did need to report any stress or distress, they really liked being able to use texting rather than having to follow the steps to log into their MyChart, which I'm sure most of us know how complicated that can be as a patient. And so really happy that participants appreciated the texting. As far as the appropriateness, most of them did feel like the messages were a good fit for them, for their situation, and for the relationship with their provider. A couple folks did mention that they would have liked the messages to be more personalized, either the content itself or more personalized messages following other interactions with their provider. These messages were sent or throughout the same time period where they were getting other services, so would want more alignment between the messages and the other services they were receiving. A couple or one mentioned that they would have liked to have been reached out to more promptly when they did mention that they weren't doing well. And then also they wanted clarity on who was sending them and if they could respond or not. It wasn't, for some participants, it wasn't clear if they could respond and if they should. But overall, the feedback for the intervention, which was delivered via the web app, was positive. And then for the authors, we had 9 of them, and this is just a brief summary of demographics, mostly women and mostly white. And for the authors, we were asking them their specific feedback on the web app. And so I've got most of the same categories here, but divided by site. And so you can see a few of the differences, but also similarities between the two. So for barriers, for one of the sites, they found that the email notifications were unreliable. And for the clinic, it was unclear. They had trouble assigning responsibility for responding to messages. As far as the user burden, the VSO site did say that they did need technical support to use it. And we've got more details of what sort of technical support that will be in the paper. And then for the clinic, they, again, sort of similar as before, found it difficult to manage coverage and assign coverage within the app itself. Those providers were used to the baton feature that is in MyChart or Epic, one of those. They were used to that sort of system to hand off coverage for a specific patient's case, and so wanted something similar. As far as usability, the clinic or the VSO site found it mostly easy to use, but some minor technical limitations. And then the clinic wanted EHR integration and a more intuitive workflow. As far as appropriateness, the VSO rated the appropriateness for their site a little bit higher. They liked that it conveyed availability to their clients, sort of like, hey, we're always here, just a text away. And it would be potentially more applicable to new clients who didn't have a specific caseworker assigned to them yet. and that it would just be a good number, a general number for them to have, and they can text with any questions. But for the clinic, they didn't feel that it was as appropriate because of some concerns about interference with the current treatment plan. And as I mentioned, the people sending the messages were the providers. Um, and they found that, or they thought that their patient preferences would be highly variable, which did come up in the qualitative interviews with their patients. A wide range of really enjoying the idea of being able to text, and others uh, really wanted to keep a very clear lines between provider relationship versus personal relationship. Um, Texting seemed to convey more of a personal relationship with which a couple of their patients weren't interested in. Overall, it was positive from both sites. The clinic or the VSO was happy that they got a lot more positive engagement than they expected. I think they didn't expect anyone to respond, but they actually had a lot of conversations and going through ISACC. And for the clinic, also positive. It was easy to use, but just perhaps wasn't as applicable to their team as it functioned at the time. And so I'll pass it off to Barbara now to talk about the art. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. This is me as well. So we're just sort of switching gears to talk about the RCT that we're currently running. And so just a quick summary of what we did implement following the end of the pilot. We added a video consent to boost comprehension. Basically, I recorded a visual version of the consent form, walking people through it. And we do require that they watch the first half of it before they can move on. Thinking that some savvy folks will turn it to like double speed, maybe they'll watch the whole thing. But we have found that it makes the very long and complex consent form easier to digest sort of in bite-sized pieces. And then we did require enrollment to the EMA platform before we would pay them for their baseline survey. And this was different from the pilot. In the pilot, we would pay them as soon as they did the first like traditional long red cap survey. And we had a couple people never actually sign up on the EMA platform. And so for the RCT, we require that they get to the platform and do their first EMA, which is sent to them the day after, before we pay them. And this has been a very a very good improvement in that we actually have people doing their EMAs, because I know that their first gift card is dependent on that. We also improved education about the EMA function, process, and compensation, which I'll talk about just in a future slide. And we also changed the sliders, the visual analog scale sliders, which Keeney mentioned, to buttons that are just labeled 0 through 10 for the EMAs because they were having, folks were having such difficulty sliding from 0 to 100 on their phone screen. It just, the data collection tool, RedCap, was just not as user-friendly on phone screens, and we really wanted EMAs to be very easy to complete. So we switched it from 0 to 10. There are a few changes to the assessment battery. We swapped out for the suicidal ideation, we swapped it from the SIQ to the Columbia screener. We swapped out the INQ and the full-length SCS to the brief SCS. We also added an exposure to loss, and because we had some folks reporting that they were on different sleep schedules, we realized we should probably ask about their sleep schedules in case that informs the sorts of responses or response rates to the EMAs. I think, and then just a few of the smaller scales which we didn't feel like were as applicable, and we did add an extra measure of housing security for the RCT. So just briefly, just highlighting this is sort of where we were losing people was the transition from the Red Cap baseline survey to signing up on the EMA platform. And so we previously didn't have lots of education about this. So we put in some effort to make some helpful graphics. So as participants move through the consent process and the baseline survey, they are shown a different version of this graphic where the arrow moves along. And finally, lots of emphasis that they've got to do their first check-in and then they'll get paid. And so we found that this has been helpful, just getting people to Inclivio, which is the EMA platform. And then again, during the EMAs, we didn't have this for the pilot, but this is shown at the beginning at the top of the screen when they open their first few EMAs of the week, is that it shows them where they are in the process, reminders about what we're asking and why, and again, reminders about getting paid and reminders about the final. And so we ended up rewording this a couple of times just in the beginning of the RCT because participants just needed a little bit more encouragement and sort of scaffolding to understand what EMAs are, why we're asking. And the biggest thing was that it's okay if they miss them. A lot of folks were really worried about missing and that they'd be dropped from the study or that they were not doing their assigned task. But just sort of reminding like, it's okay if you don't do them all. We will pay you for the ones that you did. It's okay if you miss them. But this has been really helpful compared to the pilot for getting folks through this through enrollment and through the study as we go. So then we'll switch on to talking about the RCT. And this will be Barbara.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Diving a little deeper into the COVE study or the full RCT, we just wrapped up our recruitment and we're able to recruit 521 veterans or service members. Inclusion criteria included at least 18 years old, speak English, being a US service member or veteran, which is different than the pilot study. Living in the United States, that was mainly a fraud prevention effort. A lot of online fraudulent participation takes place outside of the United States, so that was added. I believe it's just a general good practice measure. Being willing to be contacted by text message on their personal cell phone so that they can receive those caring contacts and EMA invites, and being meeting a marker for either a stress or distress variable. Those are categorized by, as you can see, stress is external, unemployment, financial strain, housing instability, separation from the military, or recent or sudden loss, or distress being depression, substance abuse, loneliness, defeat, hopelessness, psychological pain, suicidal cognitions, or presence of suicidal ideation. And we enrolled participants from April 2024 to May 2025. And our randomization strata ended up being pretty even, with 175 in caring contacts only, 175 receiving EMA only, and then 171 being caring contacts with EMA. We did make some adjustments to the assessment battery, and I went over those earlier, but if you're interested, this is an entire list of the measures that we are currently using. Go ahead and slide past that one. And for the EMA measures, we're using those visual analog scales that we've mentioned, asking the big three being how much do you want to live right now, how much do you want to die right now, and how strong are your urges for killing yourself right now. And then for the mechanisms of the caring contacts, we looked at entrapment, feelings of being a burden. So answering questions like I felt that I was a burden to other people or that they'd be better off without me. I feel trapped. The general mattering scale, where they answered on a 1 to 4 how much they felt that they mattered to others, and the responsibility scale of 1 to 5, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And here is our chart indicating when participants, depending on, so this is set up by group, the first group being caring contacts and monthly EMA, just showing their progress throughout the study through the 12 months. So they received an EMA with caring contact the majority of the month, except for month 5 and 8, which were EMA, well, 5, 8, and 10 were EMA only. And then caring contacts only set up of when they were set to receive a caring contact. And then our EMA only folks, they did the most for us. They were really earning those gift cards with doing EMAs every single month, 3 times a day for 7 days a week for 1 month. And yeah, so it was for 15 caring contacts total, 12 standard messages, and then we added in a birthday, a Veterans Day, and a New Year's holiday message as well. And I think that might be it. And pass it off to Kate again. Oh, Kate, I think you're muted.
Darn. Sorry. So in conclusion, we have been able to successfully develop a system to make it, my goal was to make it so that it's as simple to send a caring contacts as it is to receive it. I don't think that's ever going to be completely the case, but it is really, using these systems, it is really quite simple to plan, the send and respond to messages in caring contacts. And this is due to this collaboration that we had between CSPAR and the biomedical informatics team, including the human-centered design and the agile prototyping. And I am really grateful that we were able to successfully build this. Because of the goal of being able to scale and implement this, we decided that the internal UW designed ISACC model is not going to have sort of the ease of being able to be distributed widely. So we have shared our blueprint with a technology company, Mozio, who has been working with our partners in Idaho, as well as some other groups around the country sending one-way caring contacts, and with Idaho doing a study of two-way versus one-way caring contacts, and asking, now that we had this blueprint for what we wanted it to do, we are working with them to modify their platform to be able to meet some of the specifications that we've figured out are needed. We've also built out a toolkit for caring contacts to, again, speed along implementation, which you can find at caringcontacts.info. And as this technology company piece comes online in end of May, early June, we'll be modifying this toolkit over the summer to also include all the elements if somebody wanted to use the Mozio system. But we have it built so that if you want to use your own system, if you want to use Excel sheets, which is how the VA does it, we've tried to provide a toolkit to help people use caring contacts. I think it was really important that we looked at both a veteran service organization and a mental health clinic, because these are crucial use cases for caring contacts. And we were able to demonstrate that it is feasible to do in both settings. As within our research in Native communities, we have found that service organizations without a clinician are able to successfully send and manage caring contacts. And then we saw with the clinics that the biggest issue was they were all sort of in a clinically decent place to kind of manage the suicide risk, and they didn't have some of those concerns that we wondered about with our veteran service organization. However, a lot of them, even though we advised them against it, were sending the messages to their own patients and bumping into some of the problems that Anna described with that. And it really validated our perception that you really don't want to be using caring contacts with your own patients. You're better off having a separate person sending caring contacts. We have developed our online recruitment and conduct of studies, our partnership with an online advertising company to be able to recruit people online and then to move everybody through this flow. It has really been wonderful for us, and really perfecting these things so we're not always looking at a help-seeking population within a treatment clinic. Less and then as Andrew and Keeney discussed, we have been able to look at EMA as a viable measure of outcome and of the mechanisms, which was really crucial to this trial. We really, people have not studied why carrying contacts work, largely because they did not want to create a sort of parallel contact system within the intervention, and means that we continue to not understand the mechanism through which carrying contacts works. And my hope is, as we understand that, hopefully that would shape the kinds of messages we write. Kind of what could we do to actually strengthen those mechanisms, and also to be able to use EMA as an outcome measure in our research studies, which has not been done very often in suicide research. One more. So I do want to say thank you to the Garvey Institute for Brain Sciences and the Face the Fight Charitable Fund, without whose support we could not have done this work. Next slide. So I'm happy to take any questions. One more. And please notice, we'll put it in the chat as well. We really appreciate feedback on our spotlight talks. So the link to give us feedback on this presentation today is here. It's also in the chat for you. And like I said, if anybody has questions, reflections, comments, maybe since this is in the chat, we'll take the slides down, Anna, and give a chance for people to see each other. And we're just on a regular, you should all be able to either use the chat or take yourself off mute to ask questions.
We did a perfect job, Kate. No questions.
No questions. Comments, thoughts, observations? Oh, thank you. We're very much looking forward to finding out the results of our clinical trial. As Barbara indicated, we have completed recruitment for that trial within just about a year, was it? I think. So that was really, to me, impressive. Over 500 people in a year from all over the United States. So that's been a really successful process. They all need to have their year of carrying contacts and their year of EMA at this point. So we'll come back a year from now and let you know what happens.
I had a quick question. I was going to ask how your EMA retention is going in the trial. Are you past the 3 months? Like, how far along are you in the trial? And are people sticking with it for you at an acceptable rate?
Yes, I can share a little. I have a little graphic we had pulled for recent report, but yeah, so we've had above like everyone, because we require everyone to do the baseline EMA to get paid. We do have very high rates there, and then as it continues, there is a drop off, but through even I think we're now in like month 10. But we have really more responses through about month 9. Even in month 9, we're at about like 20 to 30% are doing 90% of every EMA that week. And we're closer to, I think, 80% doing at least 50% of their EMAs each week. Oh yeah, that would be great. I also might be making these numbers up, so if these numbers are different from what I just said, yeah, if you've got that, Barbara, that would be great. Okay, I was right. So yeah, through about month 9, we're about 20% have completed at least or have completed at least 90% of them. And 50% around 75%. And then for the number who've completed any that period, it's closer to 90. Just sort of my qualitative experience like going through the data as we get it, because we do use the EMAs for um, if they rate higher than or an 8 or higher on the urge to kill self, we are prompted to review their case and perhaps reach out to them. So in doing that sort of review, it seems like a lot of there's a good portion of the folks who will always do all of them, and there's another portion of the folks who will always do like one or two. And then everyone else is sort of in the middle. But um, Andrew can speak to if this is a good result. I think it is.
No, I think it's great. And, Anna, I'm guessing your question is just based on how challenging it is to do this data approach. I think in some ways, like our justification to assess multiple times per day or even multiple times per week is honestly a random assumption that like we'll just capture something in those windows. We have we've set it so that we can hopefully capture some of the caring context effects during those windows. But I think that if there was something, there are lots of ways to sort of design EMA studies to, I don't know if increase compliance, but if there was some specific event that we were looking for, that sort of, changes how we would design this. But I think with missing data, I think it's going to be okay because we're not necessarily looking for somebody to make a suicide attempt, for instance, as like as a variable in there. And so if we happen to capture that, we capture that, but it's not sort of the primary aim of the study. And so I think it's a limitation for sure, but I think the fact that we can get anyone to do it 10 months later is probably pretty good. And I think there's a feasibility paper that comes out of this just from a methods perspective.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think the 3-arm design was really smart too, because I think it answers another question about carrying contacts. Is it just that we're in touch with people that feels meaningful, or is there something about the type of message, the non-demanding nature? So I think it's really great that you all are doing this trial, and I'm also very excited to see your results.
Yeah.
I'll also say I think having the assessments come through text message and email might also be really helpful in terms of compliance, just because you don't have another app notification. I feel like I'm numb to my push notifications at this point from various apps and whatnot. But it's I wonder too if the method of delivery for the assessments might also be helping a little bit, because it's so easy to just click on the link through like the text message. So I wonder if that played a part as well. Certainly better than Palm Pilots. I remember programming Palm Pilots for EMA back in the day, and just those were awful.
You're muted, Kate.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so much to our ISACC and Cove research team for putting this presentation together, and to all of you for being here. And we'll be back when we find out what happens in the trial. Take care.